We're getting there, and we are live. Okay, welcome everybody, and I am honored to have with me tonight school psychologist Cotie Strong. So I'm going to read from his great bio. School psychologist employs Southern Lehigh School District for over 15 years now. So you've been doing this over 15 years. Undergraduate degrees in psychology education from Bucknell University. Earned his educational specialist degree in school psychology from Lehigh University. Primary experience with high school age, although you've worked with all grade levels, correct? Mm-hmm. And you coached track and field as well, cross country over 16 years, head of track and field. I know you got some wins under your belt as well, correct? And then married to Hillary, who is supposed to be here tonight, so we'll get Hillary on the next one. And she's also a school psychologist, and of course, live in Hardersville, 2 kids, and a wonderful dog named Fletcher. So, Cotie, thank you so much. It's an honor to have you here, and I can't wait to bite into this topic. It's a heavy topic. There's a lot to unpack. So before we begin, if you can tell us, what's going on in the schools now? Are you guys virtual, non-virtual? What do you hear from the state? Where do you hear locally?
So we're kind of in, with Hillary working and she works in a school district that they've been in school, 5 days a week all year. Our kids have also been the same thing. They've been in school 5 days a week all year. Where I work, they are currently hybrid throughout the whole district, which means they come in 2 days a week, and then Fridays they do asynchronous work. So the work is pushed out and then they have to turn that in. It appears as though a lot of districts are shifting to either, if they've been fully remote for the year, they're going remote now, or districts are actually moving, if they've been hybrid most of the year, they're starting to move to more of a fully, 4 to 5 day a week schedule so that the students can finish out the last 3 to 4 months of the school year pretty much in all the time.
So with the kids being in all the time, do you feel like there is a group of kids that are actually excelling by being outside, like they're doing better in that virtual setting?
We've had some kids who've really done very well in the virtual setting, because some kids, going to school is stressful. So kind of taking that factor away, and when they can just focus on doing their schoolwork, they're able to be a little bit more focused. And they've really done very well. Other kids, they've gone out and they've chosen to be remote. Maybe not for the right reason. They've wanted to they thought that it was going to be easier, or they're avoiding something, or, it wasn't a good idea, but their parents didn't really force them into probably the better decision, which would have been for them to be hybrid or in school. And it really hasn't gone very well for some of those students. So some of them are going to be behind going into next year.
Okay, so how does one begin to help that person who's behind? Because we're not going to get out of it, in this month and next month. As we were saying before, we're going on a year now. So what can parents do? What can students do to help? Because come fall, we might be in this same position again.
Yeah, and looking out to next year, there is, some school districts, I know where I believe where I work and where Hillary works and where our kids are, I think that the theory is going to be mostly in all time next year. Some districts who've been fully remote all year, I think they're going to almost use going to hybrid next year as kind of a transition period. So I think catching those students up is it really comes down to connections, which is really challenging when you only see a student maybe twice a week, or you only see them through a computer monitor. And even on that computer monitor, they may not turn their camera on to make that connection. So that's like teaching 101 is make connections with your students. They say that is, research oriented. The number one thing you can do to make your students successful is to make those personal connections with them. So that's what's really challenging in this setting is to make those connections. And I even noticed that, with, working as a school psychologist, but also with, coaching, I don't know the kids as well. So I don't know this kid's struggling with academics because I just don't see them as much, or maybe, they seem tired, but why is that? Whereas in years past, I'm like, what? I talked to him the other day, he's up too late playing video games. But, if you don't know those little things about your students, it just kind of gets easy to move on and not help them the way or make those connections with them.
We talk about connections, and you're talking about working with the students, the facial expressions of the students, playing a important role, were covered with masks. What is your thought on, like, okay, so they're not going to allow us to take the mask off. The fact they're talking about, wearing 2 and 3 masks.
Yeah.
So, would it be better to have that mask where you can actually, it's clear, or like the face shield? I mean, because you need to see the reaction. That reaction does make a difference.
Yeah, and we had some people that wore those early on, and in my daughter's class, she actually her teacher has a little bit of a hearing need. So there's been times where they've had the masks that have kind of like the opening in there, but then I know some of them were told they couldn't really wear those masks because they weren't as safe. But losing that facial expression, and it's sometimes like I see kids in school that I'm working with, and then we have a meeting and they're maybe virtual that day, and then they get out without the mask. And you're like, oh, so that's what they look like. You kind of forget, like even you're seeing anybody that you're used to seeing day in and day out. Like if we have a virtual day, and then the counselor who I see, for a few hours a day every day, and then we see her online. It's just a really different thing. And the one counselor I work with has a real young daughter who's like 6 or 7 months old, and she's been really concerned about that when she goes to daycare that they all have masks on. How is that creating, how is that social development going to occur with someone when you can't see those facial expressions? So that's a really interesting thing that we'll have to kind of figure out as we go along. So,
imagine, it's stressful for us as adults, the stress that the kids must be going through, right? So,
yeah.
Are you seeing kids, you deal primarily high school, but I'm sure you hear from other school psychologists, the amount of stress that's increasing, it has to be growing. So what are you guys sharing with the kids? There's the stress of, being in high school in of itself, and, there's stuff that they're missing, but the stress of this pandemic is really beginning to weigh, a heavy toll on them. So what are you sharing with them? How are you helping them to cope, to get through this, or at least to almost adapt to this, because it's not going to go away right away?
Yeah, and adapting is one thing, and we're also just trying to, we just had a meeting this week where we were talking about, and I hadn't even kind of thought about this, because we actually are planning graduation. We have an option to go to our school goes to Stabler Arena on Lehigh's campus usually, and as of right now we have that rented out. But we have a couple backup plans, which would be doing an outdoor ceremony at the stadium. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Like they'll have graduation. But then I forgot that they've missed everything else this year. They haven't had prom. They haven't had homecoming. They haven't had, whereas last year's class, they lost graduation. But for the most part, they were able to have just about everything throughout their senior year that most seniors have, other than kind of the graduation at the end. So just trying to make things as normal as possible. We're trying to provide things that make it seem like, okay, this is what it should feel like. We should have this occur during our senior year, and still trying to make those memory makers so that students remember high school as an enjoyable experience. So those are the things we're trying to do with our seniors right now. And I know, like, my kids are in 5th grade, and there's things that they missed last year and things that they'll miss this year, that kind of as a transition year into middle school, there's, like, last year they're supposed to go to Harrisburg on a trip. This year they were supposed to go somewhere else. So, trying to recreate those memories is what we're trying to do.
So what do you say to the student that says, listen, I'm getting ripped off. I'm not getting my prom. I'm not getting my due. This is what I've looked forward to the whole time. What do you share with them?
Yeah, it's tough. Everybody's missing out, and disappointment is a big factor this year. I see it with the kids I work with. I see it with my own kids. I feel it myself, and we constantly feel like we put in extra effort for less return. The kids at school are working really hard on, like, a project, and instead of being able to present it to the group, they can only just submit it online or submit a paper copy. But just trying to tell them, like, look, this won't always be like this, and I know it's disappointing that you're missing out on X, Y, and Z, but we're going to try to provide these other things to try to make sure it's still a rich experience for you this year.
I get to work with teachers who are just feeling burned out. I hear it a lot from parents who are tired. They know their children are tired.
Mhm.
What are some of the signs that parents can look for if they feel that that your child may be demonstrating that, what, this is time for a break, we need to do something different, whether it's a different activity or we need to actually bring in professional help?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's been a really challenging thing this year because everybody the bar has been raised as far as the stress level and the anxiety level kind of across the board. And I think now we're kind of humming at this kind of like, oh, this must be kind of normal, when really it's really been raised. And I think when you use your parents' intuition as to, does this really seem out of the ordinary for what my child is doing, kind of age appropriate or age level wise. If you have a kid who's 8, 9, 10 years old and you're starting to see trouble with sleep, or they're having trouble going to sleep, or they're having trouble staying asleep, or they're changing in eating habits, or they seem to really be their emotions seem to either go really up or down, or they're just not themselves. That's when you have to start to question, okay, is this more than just what's going on with the pandemic? Do I need to reach out to somebody to get some help? And usually a good place to start is contacting your child's teacher, or the counselor, or if there's a school psychologist at the building they're at, and just ask, hey, what are you seeing from the other kids? This is what I'm seeing at home. Can I get a comparison as to, this is what I'm seeing, is this out of the ordinary? And I've had parents call me about that this year, and I said, yeah, it seems pretty similar to what's going on. Like, I can tell why you're concerned. Let's talk this through, come up with some recommendations, and let me know how things are going in a few weeks. Other times I've been like, yeah, the trouble they're having sleeping, they're not eating a lot, their grades have dropped. Why don't we work on trying to get them in to see, through the school I'm at, we have a couple options for group counseling, and individual counseling through some providers in our area. But those are really good kind of pathways to get some, because as a parent, you kind of know your own children. If you don't work in the schools, you don't have that kind of comparison as to, well, is this what's going on? So that's really good, working with the school.
So, I mean, does every school have a school psychologist?
No, but every school district in Pennsylvania has. Now, they're not required staff, but most school districts in the area will have them, because if you don't, you're either contracting people out to have them, or you wouldn't be able to keep up with your evaluations and whatnot. And I mean, I'd be hard pressed to find a district in this part of the state that doesn't have a school counselor in every building, and then if not a school psychologist in most buildings, at least multiple ones throughout the school district.
Okay. And then would that student then work with the school psychologist, a one-on-one? Is it usually virtual now? What is happening with that? How has your practice actually changed?
So it's been a combination. I've had students that have been, if they're hybrid, they've come in and we've met and we've worked. I've had students who we've done, if they're fully remote, we've gotten on like a Google Meets or a Zoom and done counseling that way. We're fortunate where I work that we contract with Lehigh Valley Hospital, and then the Cairn Foundation, which is out of, I think they're based in Reading, and they've provided, they were doing in-person individual sessions, but now they've gone to fully virtual sessions to provide support.
And when you see a student, is there like evaluations that you do? I mean, is there like, what happens when a student comes to you? I mean, where do you begin?
So it depends. Sometimes it's a matter of just kind of talking with them, working things through, and it could just be a one-time session and maybe a follow-up. A lot of students get to me from a parent concern. The parents are seeing things like the grades have dropped, there's behavioral concerns at home, things along those lines. And then they contact me and we talk things through. And there's really kind of there's two pathways that we can kind of go with an evaluation piece. One would be a 504 evaluation, which falls under the umbrella of Americans with Disabilities Act. So that would be students who have maybe a diabetic condition, ADHD, an anxiety disorder, depression, and maybe they just need some general accommodations in the classroom, and they don't need instruction. They might need extra time on tests, sit in the front of the room, maybe a check-in with a guidance counselor a couple times a month, things like that. The other pathway is a special education evaluation, which is more comprehensive, where you're doing IQ testing, achievement testing, behavior rating scales with the teachers, the parent, the student. I'm doing observations, record review. Sometimes a psychiatric evaluation is done through our intermediate unit for the student. So those are kind of the pathways that we would do evaluations. And I've been fortunate the students have come in. We haven't done any testing virtually. Like I haven't administered an IQ test over Zoom, but it's been tricky just because schedule wise, kid may not be coming in all week, so to schedule those things can be a little bit trickier this year than if they're just, hey, I got to go get this kid out of study hall and I just call them down.
So it's interesting because, you guys have your evaluations that you have to, you go through. On my end, we're seeing a lot of the parents complain about a lot of their kids having anxiety, having stress. This is turning into gut issues, weight loss, or the opposite way, they're gaining weight because they're not moving. I mean, they're not even getting up, in between classes and walking. So physical activity has to play a large role. And again, you head up track. So can you talk about what's happening with physical activity in school and what you guys are recommending and track and all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like I really worry about how much the kids are on their screens during the day. And there's been a couple of times where we've had stretches where we weren't allowed to practice. Like in December, we had about three weeks where we weren't allowed to stay after practice and stay after school and practice. So I did a couple, broke up the groups, and we did some Zoom sessions where we looked at some video and just kind of talked things through, and I gave them the workouts. But then this month when we've had, the weather's been really poor, I've sent out workouts and just said, look, here's a workout to do on your own. You've had enough screen time. I don't even want to have you on a Zoom meeting with me for 10 minutes at this point. Go out, get some fresh air, get some exercise. And traditionally we've been able to be in the building, in the weight room or the auxiliary gym, and we've kind of stationed ourselves inside and gone out and come back in. The agreement was that we could have a season, but we had to keep everything outside. So we've been very much dictated by the weather. In years past, the kids would complain about being in the weather and it'd be cold or snowy. But this year, we had, even this week, we had practices. It was maybe 28 degrees. I've had no complaints from kids. They just look happy to be not outside, getting some fresh air. They just seem happy to be with each other. So they're kind of chatty, and they just seem like that energy of being around their peers and not just seeing them through a screen. I've had no complaints. They just seem happy to be outside.
That's excellent. So from an administrative perspective, where's the SAT testing? Where's the Keystone testing? And since you're in high school, what happens to athletics and the possibility of scholarship to get into college? That's got to play a large role now. Yeah, the SATs and ACTs have been. We can't ever get it twisted that they're about making money. So they want to make, they want to be a gateway to help you get into college, but they want to make money. So if we have to put it online and charge you a fee for that, they don't mind figuring that things out, even if it means well, how do you know the kid's not on their phone while they're answering the SAT questions? Oh, well, that's okay. They paid their fee. It's okay. I'm a little cynical of College Board. Hopefully they're not watching right now, but so that has been an issue because last year you just couldn't test, other than there were some remote options and a couple here and there. So, kids are a little behind when it comes to those types of things in getting ready to do the college application stuff. But we've been telling kids, look, everybody across the country is in the same boat. Colleges are looking at kids and knowing that their junior year,
was very different. They finished out differently. Their senior year is looking very different. As far as athletic scholarships, that depending on the sport, it's had a bigger impact than others. Like for track and field, we lost our entire spring season last year. So we were fortunate we had a winter season, so any of the kids could kind of, submit their times from last winter. But, other sports, it's been really difficult that they, so coaches are having to go back like, well, okay, like he's a senior, plays a spring senior sport, maybe baseball, and I have no data or information on that kid since his sophomore year. Like that's a big difference, like sophomore boy to a senior, and who knows what's happened in between. So it's really put a lot of guesswork into the recruiting process.
And what is do you feel the general consensus of 11th graders, 12th graders about going to college in our current situation? Is it like, forget it, I'll just see how it plays out? I mean, or is like we're going to be gung ho and we're going to go? What are you seeing across the board?
It seems this year it's a little bit more, we're going to go. We're gonna go to school. Whereas last year there was a lot of like, oh well, like I'm not going to pay tens of thousands of dollars just to be on my computer in a dorm room or on a computer in my house. Like, so we had a lot of kids that did a year of community college, took a year off, maybe went somewhere closer instead of going out of state. Whereas this year it feels a little bit more closer to what we're used to, where kids are kind of like, I want to go to Colgate, in upstate New York, or I want to go to South Carolina or somewhere out of state. So it seems a little closer to what we've seen in the past.
And what about this whole, the gap year concept? Is that still into play? You can't really travel. So what's happening with that gap year? What's happening with traveling, abroad during your semester and all that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We don't have a whole lot of kids that do gap years, and as far as like kids traveling abroad, I got to think that's pretty much been shut down this year. I actually had a couple of girls I coached who were actually in China last fall, and literally came home like third week of January. So I kind of joke with them, like if they hadn't come home when they did, they may still be there.
That's a very good point.
Like they came home just in time for everything to be going on. So yeah.
It's a very good point. So let's talk about something that's really important. Often children are sleep deprived. A lot of adults are sleep deprived. Are you seeing more of this now? I mean, is it what are you seeing with the kids? Are they able to pay attention virtually, or are they just putting up a picture of themselves and?
Well, it's funny. I've actually, as part of my evaluations, if a kid's fully remote, I've had to observe them. I've had to go onto the Zoom class and observe them in class. And some kids have their screen on, so I can see that, okay, well, it looks like they're kind of looking at what they're supposed to be doing. But other kids, it's just a picture or their name, and you're just taking notes on what the teacher's doing. But yeah, I worry. I think kids, we could do a whole nother session on kids and sleep deprivation and what that is, what I worry about with our kids at the high school level. But what I see, what's almost trickier for kids is that I've had kids that, I've been like, this workout didn't go well. Like, what happened? Like, well, I had like a half a peanut butter sandwich at like 2:00. So here we have kids who are 9th through 12th grade, home by themselves, and they just, to plan their day out, like eating or taking care of their basic needs just kind of goes out the window, so that worries me as much as the sleep deprivation. I more often than not, when I talk to any kid, I get to bed about 11:30, 12:00. I'm like, you get up at 6:30, and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. And usually when they're telling me that, I'm thinking that they're giving me like the upper end of the continuum. Like they're probably getting to bed even later than that. So that definitely worries me. And
then therefore, most likely screen time plays a role, right? So, it sounds like, that the setting up the schedule is one of the things they can do to work to their advantage. Is that correct?
Yeah. And when you talk to kids, they come in for counseling and they're having trouble with grades. And we sit down. I have a set of questions I go through, and I always go down. Okay, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? What'd you have for lunch? How much water are you drinking? When do you usually go to bed? And those things are very revealing. And we'll say, okay, so you go to bed at 11:30. When you get home at 2:30, what is it that you're doing all that? And like, well, I start my homework around 9:30. I'm like, what are you doing for 6 hours? Like, yeah. And it's hard because a lot of them, they just don't know. That's because they're on their phone, or it's just this huge time suck of stuff that they get on their screen. So,
and I always try to share with, the adult patients and the teenagers that we see is like wearing the blue light glasses is always helpful because there's so much screen time. And after you're done the day of school, you have to shut off the computer. You don't go from computer to the phone because then it's just screen time.
Yeah. No, it's just changing one for another. Yeah.
Right. And that's why movement is super important. I often say, and you can talk to this as well, how you feel about when they're sitting in front of like their virtual classes, actually be sitting on that stability ball to stay moving, because there's been a lot of like research that says if you're moving on and you're sitting on a stability ball, you have better focus.
Yeah.
Because you just sit still and drives that poor posture as well.
Yeah.
So what can you share for, like resources, emotional support or mental resources that can help a student? Where can they turn to?
As far as students and parents, I mean, there's some really good resources online. I mean, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia has great resources. Children's Hospital of Boston has really good resources. There's a really good website that I use, Child Mind Institute, that sends out usually it's a weekly letter about 5 to 6 articles. They're well written, they're researched, but they're also easy to digest. But and that's research parents can do on their own. But really, again, going back to reaching out to your even if your child is fully remote, reaching out to your school, the teacher, the counselor, is really important, because they're the ones that really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on with the other kids to really figure out, okay, is this typical for this year, or is this not typical? And that's going to be different for the district my kids go to, where I work, where Hillier works, a district close to Philly. It's always going to be a little different, but based on where you're at.
In your school district, is there anything that is set up for where like the older students can help the younger students, like any kind of like tutoring, any kind of thing where it kind of becomes like a one world schoolhouse kind of deal where the upper students are helping the middle students and so forth?
Yeah, we have National Honor Society students who provide tutoring for younger students, or they could be the same grade if that would work out. We have other organizations that provide, we have an organization called Avidum, which provides support for students who, might feel like they're being marginalized or need support for things. We have Gay Straight Alliance programs. So we have a lot of different programs that help support students amongst themselves.
And those who have disabilities, is there other programs for them to be involved in as well?
A little bit more. Those are more kind of community based, as far as students that have maybe autism or things like that. They have there's more community resources for them than kind of within the schools to provide.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as we wrap this up, is there something that you can share with parents to help them with their children best? Is there something that you would like to say to parents?
I think that really doing the small things well, or trying to do the small things as parents, is really important. The things we've tried to do in our household is sit down and eat meals together. Although now it feels like we've done that 365 days in a row. But some of the things, if there's a silver lining around some of these things, is that we've spent a lot of time together. We eat meals together. When we get off tonight, we're going to watch Name That Tune together. We've watched movies together. We've gone on numerous dog walks every day. So in trying to spend time, trying to spend really doing those things, having a bedtime routine, those things that seem like fundamentals are even more important now for kids to feel safe and comfortable, and that, this world is making sense to them.
Excellent. All right. Fantastic. So listen, thank you so much. This is probably one of many things that we can dive into between you and Hillary.
Yeah.
We cover a lot of information. I just feel that, again, working with so many, moms and dads and teachers, we need more help. And I really appreciate and respect the work that you both do. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thanks. All right. Hang